The air in the sanctum of harmony was a lie. It was filtered to a purity that suggested tranquility, chilled to a temperature that encouraged calm deliberation, and carried the faint, subliminal resonance of Ethelcast's psionic chording, a frequency meant to soothe and unify. But for emissary Kalen of the Cathar, the air was thick with the dust of murdered worlds, cold with the vacuum that had claimed his allies, and the resonant chords felt less like a balm and more like the tightening wires of a cage. He stood on the obsidian dais, his crystalline form refracting the cool, indirect light of the chamber into 1,000 sorrowful rainbows. Before him, elevated on a throne of living, light-woven metal, sat Praetor Vorlag of the Ethel, his ancient, elongated form a study in serene arrogance. The grand council of 1,000 species surrounded them in tiered arcs, a silent, judgmental galaxy of eyes fixed upon him. The silence was the most crushing weight of all. It was the silence that had followed the news of the Lumani's scouring. It was the silence of complicity. Kalen's thoughts, usually the slow, deliberate chime of resonating crystal, were a frantic, discordant shatter. He had come here not for war, not for revenge, but for the one thing the Council claimed to embody above all else: justice. The Lumani, a gentle species of sentient gas clouds who had been the Cathar's symbiotic partners for millennia, had been deemed a source of cosmic dissonance. Their unique, chaotic method of procreation, a swirling ballet of stellar nursery gases and shared consciousness, had been flagged by the Council's harmony auditors as a deviation from the stable life-form protocols. The verdict had been delivered, a fleet had been dispatched, and an entire species, a vibrant and poetic civilization, had been dispersed into inert atoms by purification flames. The Council called it a harmonic realignment. Kalen called it a massacre. Praetor, Kalen's voice was not a product of lungs, but of precisely vibrated facets of his body, a sound like deep, melodic bells. I stand before this council to ask for a recognition of loss. The Lumani were not a threat. They were artists, poets, dreamers. Their dissonance, as you termed it, was the source of their beauty. They were our bonded, our other halves. You have not merely extinguished a species. You have torn a wound in the very soul of my people. Praetor Vorlag's head tilted, a slow, reptilian gesture of feigned consideration. His voice, when it came, was not spoken but impressed directly upon the minds of all present, a smooth, cold river of thought. Emissary Kalen, the grief of the Cathar is acknowledged, but it is misplaced. It is the grief of a parent for a child who walks a path of self-destruction. The Council's purpose is not to judge beauty, but to preserve the structural integrity of reality. Cosmic dissonance is not a philosophical concept. It is a measurable, quantifiable energy that weakens the barriers between dimensions. Unchecked, it invites ruin. The Lumani's evolutionary path was a wildfire. We did not destroy them. We contained them. A murmur rippled through the assembled delegates. Most were cowed, their species having long ago accepted the Council's doctrine of harmony as the only shield against a dark and chaotic universe. They had trimmed their own evolutionary branches, smoothed their own cultural eccentricities, all to appease the Ethel and their ancient, terrifying warnings. The Cathar, however, remembered a time before the Council, a time of wild, untamed creation. They had joined not out of fear, but a hope for a greater community. That hope was now ash. By what right? Kalen's chimes grew sharper, losing their melody for a hard, cutting edge. Does the Council decide which evolutionary paths are valid? Who gave you the authority to be the sole arbiters of existence? The universe is defined by its infinite variation. To demand uniformity is to demand death. The right of knowledge, the Praetor's thought voice replied, its placid surface unrippled by Kalen's passion. The Ethel are the oldest. We have seen galaxies flicker and die. We have listened to the echoes of cosmic screams. We know the signs of a coming plague, and dissonance is its primary symptom. We act not out of malice, but from a burden of terrible foresight. Your Lumani were a beautiful but tragic song, sung in a key that threatened to shatter the firmament. We silenced the song to save the symphony. It was then that a new topic entered the Praetor's broadcast, a subtle shift in the current of his thoughts. There is another, more pressing matter of dissonance. A new species has entered galactic space. They call themselves humans. The name was new to most. A ripple of curiosity and apprehension passed through the chamber. Kalen felt a cold dread crystallize in his core. He had seen the preliminary reports. This new species was an auditor's nightmare. They were not a unified whole, but a chaotic collection of competing nations, philosophies, and even subspecies. Their biology was unstable, prone to rapid mutation. Their culture was a maelstrom of conflicting ideas, their art loud and jarring, their expansion clumsy and unpredictable. They were, by every metric the Council used, the most dissonant species ever encountered. They have settled on worlds near the Zephyr Veil, the Praetor continued, his mental voice taking on a graver tone. And they have done something unprecedented. They have not conquered or uplifted the native presentient life. They have formed partnerships. They are actively encouraging the chaotic biological development of species the Council had marked for culling or containment. They are cultivating dissonance as if it were a garden. The delegate from the Glypt Prime, a hulking being of stone and silicon whose people were masters of planetary engineering, shifted its massive form. An alliance has been reported, it grated, its voice like grinding tectonic plates. Between these humans and the nascent intelligence on Cygnus X1's third world, the Glyptons, they are teaching them art. The word hung in the air, an obscenity in this temple of sterile order. Art, in the Council's view, was a vector of emotional chaos, a primary amplifier of dissonance. Indeed, the Praetor confirmed, the humans have established a protectorate over the Glyptons, claiming they have a right to self-determination. This is a dangerous philosophy, Emissary Kalen. It is the same argument you make for the Lumani. It is the idea that every spark of life, no matter how volatile, should be allowed to grow into a conflagration. We have sent envoys to this Earth, their homeworld, to explain the principles of harmony. Their response has been perplexing. A screen of shimmering light materialized in the center of the sanctum. It showed a human. The creature was soft, fragile-looking, with a face that was a constant, subtle flux of micro-expressions. It was speaking, its voice a series of modulated pressure waves that felt primitive and inefficient compared to the ethel's telepathy. Subtitles translated its alien sounds. And so, while we appreciate the Council's perspective on cosmic stability, the human was saying, its expression one of placid seriousness. The principle of sovereignty and the inherent right of a sentient or potentially sentient species to choose its own path is, for humanity, a non-negotiable axiom. We cannot and will not stand aside while another intelligence is extinguished for the sake of a prescribed order it had no voice in creating. The recording ended. The silence that followed was heavier than before. Kalen studied the human's face. There was no arrogance in it, no malice. There was only a calm, unshakable certainty. It was a certainty that stood in direct opposition to 1,000 millennia of Council doctrine. It was the certainty of a being that had never been taught to be afraid of its own nature. They are children, the Praetor's voice whispered through the chamber, playing with forces they cannot comprehend. They champion chaos because they have never witnessed the abyss it summons. They must be educated. Their new allies, the Glyptons, are developing along a dangerously dissonant trajectory under their guidance. This cannot be allowed to continue. A fleet of harmonizers has been dispatched to the Cygnus system. It will perform a realignment on the Glypton species. The humans will be given a chance to observe the necessity of our work. It is a lesson they must learn for their own good and for the good of the galaxy. Kalen felt his crystalline structure vibrate with a cold, clear horror. It was happening again, the same logic, the same euphemisms, the same serene, murderous certainty. They were going to massacre another innocent species, this time as a lesson. He looked at the faces of the other delegates. He saw fear, resignation, and the grim acceptance of a power they dared not challenge. He had come here seeking justice for the dead, and instead he was being forced to bear witness to the sentencing of the living. The humans, these strange, chaotic newcomers, had no idea what was coming. They had offered diplomacy and principle to a power that understood only dogma and force. They had sent a philosopher to argue with a scalpel, and the scalpel was now poised to cut. The days that followed were a torment of waiting. Kalen remained in the Citadel, a guest who was in reality a prisoner confined by the suffocating web of diplomatic protocol. He watched the interstellar sensoriums, his mind replaying the image of the human ambassador. That calm face, the unwavering eyes. Had it been naivete or something else? He had spent his life in the presence of immense power, the crushing gravity of the Ethel and their council. Their power was in their age, their technology, their unshakable belief in their own righteousness. It was the power of a mountain, ancient and immovable. The humans felt different. Their power, if they had any, was not on display. They had sent diplomats, not dreadnoughts. They had spoken of rights, not threats. They had extended a hand of friendship to a species the Council deemed vermin. He found himself accessing the Council's archives on humanity, diving into the frantic, confused reports filed by the Ethel observers. The data was a mess of contradictions. The humans were hopelessly divided, yet capable of breathtaking feats of coordinated action. Their technology was a chaotic patchwork of different principles, some appearing almost primitive, others touching on theoretical impossibilities. They waged war on each other with devastating brutality, yet they also created sanctuaries for endangered life on their own planet. They were a paradox, a walking, talking embodiment of dissonance. Their core philosophy seemed to be a celebration of that very chaos. They called it diversity, freedom, individuality. The Council called it a disease. The day the Harmonizer fleet arrived in the Cygnus system, the Sanctum was convened again, the vast viewing screen activated to show a live feed from the lead Ethel vessel. The Praetor's intent was clear. This was to be a demonstration for the entire galaxy, a public lesson. Kalen was forced to watch, his own pain a tool for the Council's propaganda. On the screen, the planet Cygnus X1c, home of the Glyptons, hung like a jeweled orb in the void. It was a world of breathtaking, organic architecture, the entire surface covered in crystalline cities and soaring spires grown by the Glyptons themselves. They were biological masons, shaping their planet with their own secreted substances. It was beautiful, it was unique, and it was doomed. The Ethel fleet was a collection of stark, geometric shapes, ships designed not for battle but for sterilization. They moved into orbital positions with cold, unhurried precision. Between them and the planet was a small, mismatched collection of human ships. They were aesthetically displeasing to the Ethel eye, asymmetrical, bulky, covered in external modules and weapon emplacements that spoke of a philosophy of function over form. They looked crude, insufficient. A direct channel was opened, and the face of the human ambassador, Eva Rostova, appeared on a secondary screen. She was not on Earth, but on the bridge of the lead human vessel. Her expression was unchanged from the recording Kalen had seen before, a mask of profound, sorrowful calm. Human ambassador, the Praetor's thought voice boomed across the channel, foregoing any pretense of diplomacy. You were warned. You have been given the opportunity to stand aside and witness a necessary procedure. Remove your vessels, or they will be removed for you. Ambassador Rostova's gaze was fixed on the Praetor's image. Her voice, when it came, was quiet but carried across the comms with perfect clarity. Praetor Vorlag, we have filed formal protests. We have presented philosophical arguments. We have offered alternative solutions for containment and observation that do not involve genocide. You have rejected them all. We are here to state for the final time, the Glyptons are under the protection of the Terran Alliance. An attack on them is an attack on us. We ask you one last time to turn your fleet around. The Praetor made a gesture of dismissal, a languid wave of a three-fingered hand. The Ethel fleet commanders would have received their orders telepathically. There was no need for public command. It was a gesture of supreme, untouchable authority. Your request is denied. Your presence is an irrelevance. The lesson will now commence. On the main screen, the Ethel Harmonizer ships began to glow, their primary purification arrays charging. These were not weapons of war in the conventional sense. They did not fire missiles or energy beams that caused explosions. They projected a field that unraveled complex organic matter at the molecular level, turning it back into its base elements. It was clean, efficient, and absolute. Kalen braced himself, his crystalline form resonating with a grief so profound it felt like it would crack him open. He was about to watch it happen again. Another species, another beautiful song, silenced forever. The human ships did not move. They simply held their position, a tiny, defiant line against the inevitable. And then something happened that was not in the Ethel plan. The human ambassador, Eva Rostova, looked directly into her calm pickup. Her calm expression finally broke, but not with fear or anger. It was replaced by an immense, weary sadness. We showed you our laws, she said, her voice barely a whisper, yet echoing through the sanctum like a thunderclap. We showed you our philosophy. We showed you our hearts. You have left us no other way. We are a species of last resorts. She closed her eyes. Diplomacy has failed. In the space between the human ships and the Ethel fleet, reality buckled. It did not tear or shatter, it simply flexed. There was no light, no sound, no energy discharge that could be measured. There was only a sudden, profound wrongness. The Ethel ships, moments from firing, suddenly went dark. Their glow faded. Their engines died. They did not explode. They simply ceased to be systems. One moment they were the pinnacle of Ethel engineering, instruments of absolute power. The next, they were inert, lifeless husks of metal, drifting in the void. It was as if every single intricate component, every fusion reactor, every command circuit, every life support system had been simultaneously and instantly disassembled into its constituent atoms from the inside out, while leaving the ship's outer hull perfectly intact. The effect cascaded through the entire Harmonizer fleet in less than a second. A vast armada, the pride of the Council and the terror of the galaxy, was rendered into a fleet of silent, powerless tombs. There were no casualties among the Ethel crews. The human effect had been precise. It had targeted technology only. The life support on the Ethel ships would last for a standard cycle, more than enough time for rescue. But the message was absolute. The sanctum of harmony was utterly silent. The delegates stared, their minds unable to process what they had just witnessed. This was not warfare. Warfare was messy, violent, a contest of energy and matter. This was something else. It was like watching a master surgeon excise a cancer with a tool no one had ever seen before, a tool that operated on the fundamental laws of physics. The humans hadn't just defeated the fleet. They had edited it out of existence as a threat. They had not raised their voice. They had not postured or threatened. They had made a statement of fact. The Praetor's serene facade was shattered. Kalen could feel the Ethel's shock and fury, a raw, naked wave of disbelief and violation. This was a power they did not recognize, a science that was not in their archives. It was an act of impossible consequence. On the screen, Ambassador Rostova opened her eyes. They were filled with a deep, ancient sorrow. She looked at the Praetor's icon, her voice regaining its steady, measured tone. "We never wanted this. We value life above all else, even the lives of those who would do harm. Your crews are alive. We will assist in their recovery, but this must end. The Council's policy of harmonic realignment is over. Today, you will stand down your fleets. You will cease all genocidal actions. You will come to the table and speak to the rest of the galaxy not as its guardians, but as its peers. This is not a request." The transmission cut. The viewing screen showed only the silent, drifting ghost fleet of the Ethel, the vibrant world of the Glyptons untouched behind them, and the small, unassuming human ship standing sentinel, their work done. For a long moment, no one in the sanctum moved. The spell of 1,000 millennia had been broken. The unshakable power of the Ethel had been revealed as a fragile vanity. The children had not only refused the lesson, they had dismissed the teacher. Kalen felt a new resonance begin within him. It was not grief. It was not anger. It was a slow, dawning, terrifying sense of awe. He finally understood. The Council had underestimated humanity on a scale that was almost mythological. They had seen a chaotic, primitive species and missed the quiet, terrifyingly potent unity of purpose that lay beneath. They mistook the lack of aggression for a lack of ability. They had assumed the philosophers had no swords. But they did, and their swords cut reality itself. Kalen looked at the Praetor, whose living throne seemed to flicker, its light dimming in response to its master's shock. He remembered the human's calm, sad face, the finality in her voice. He finally had the words, the perfect, terrible words to describe the history he had just witnessed. The Galactic Council massacred his allies, the Lumani. Then they had moved to massacre Earth's allies, the Glyptons. And when diplomacy failed, Earth's warships spoke. They spoke a language of absolute, undeniable, and surgically precise consequence. A language that had just silenced an empire and changed the shape of the galaxy forever. The aftermath was not a storm, but a slow, tectonic shift. The power vacuum left by the Council's sudden impotence was terrifying to some, liberating to others. The Ethel, for the first time in their recorded history, withdrew into a stunned, humiliated silence. Their fleets, once the arbiters of galactic law, were now largely inert, their technology mysteriously and fundamentally non-functional. The humans spoke had not been a temporary disabling pulse. It was a permanent, systemic rewriting of their core systems. It was as if every Ethel shipwright, every engineer had woken up to find their understanding of physics was a child's crayon drawing in a universe that demanded calculus. Delegations from 100 worlds descended upon the human embassy, a modest station in a neutral system. Kalen was among the first. He expected to find a triumphant, conquering power. He expected arrogance, demands, a new empire rising from the ashes of the old. He found none of it. He was greeted not by soldiers, but by diplomats and scientists. Ambassador Rostova met him in a simple, quiet room, offering him a seat. There was no throne, no dais. They sat as equals. "Emissary Kalen," she began, her voice retaining that same somber calm. "We regret that our first meaningful interaction with the galactic community was one of conflict. It is not how we wish to introduce ourselves." "You regret it?" Kalen's chimes were soft with disbelief. "You saved the Glyptons. You broke the tyranny of the Ethel. You have given the galaxy a chance to breathe for the first time in ages. What is there to regret?" "The necessity of it," Rostova said, her eyes distant. "In our history, we have learned that power, even when used for a righteous cause, is a corrosive force. The act of using it changes you. We had to demonstrate that the Council's path was no longer tenable. We did so with the minimum force required. We did not destroy their ships. We did not harm their crews. We simply turned them off. But it was still an act of coercion, an act of violence against their will. We will carry the weight of that choice. This was the source of the humans' power, Kalen realized. It was not their impossible technology. It was their restraint. It was the profound, deeply ingrained ethical consideration that governed its use. Any other species, upon discovering such a weapon, would have carved out an empire. The humans had used it to enforce a peace treaty. Over the following cycles, the humans shared their knowledge, but not in the way the Council had. They didn't issue edicts or offer gifts of technology that would create dependency. They offered education. They opened archives. They invited scientists from other species to collaborate on projects to study at their universities. They shared their art, their music, their dizzying, contradictory philosophies. They did not demand conformity. They celebrated difference. They saw the dissonance the Ethel so feared and called it by another name, potential. A new galactic body began to form, a true alliance built on mutual respect and consent, not fear. The Cathar, with their long memories, became the historians and archivists of this new coalition. The Glyptons, their creative spirit now unleashed, became the chief architects and engineers, designing habitats and starships of breathtaking, organic beauty. Dozens of other species, freed from the crushing weight of harmonic doctrine, rediscovered their own unique cultures, their own evolutionary paths. The galaxy, which had been a carefully curated, monochromatic garden under the Ethel, began to explode into a vibrant, chaotic, and beautiful wilderness. Kalen worked closely with Ambassador Rostova, who was now a central figure in the new alliance. He came to understand the paradox of her people. They were capable of the most profound empathy and the most terrifyingly detached logic. They mourned every life lost in their own brutal history, a history they shared openly, without shame, as a series of cautionary tales. That history, Kalen learned, was the crucible that had forged their ethics. They had seen the enemy in themselves, in their own tribalism, their own capacity for dogma and destruction. They had fought a war against their own nature for thousands of years, and the result was a species that understood, in its very bones, the dark allure of certainty and the profound responsibility of power. It was during a data-sharing session, deep within the archival core of a human science vessel, that the final piece of the puzzle fell into place. A human xenolinguist, a young man with eyes that burned with restless curiosity, was showing Kalen the analysis of the Ethel's core command network, which they had peacefully and completely decrypted after the Cygnus incident. "It's fascinating," the linguist Dr. Aristhorn explained, pointing to a complex, spiraling diagram of data flow. The Ethel weren't just being tyrants for the sake of it. Their entire civilization, their harmony doctrine, it was all built around a fear of something real. They called it the Great Dissonance, but that was their interpretation. We think it's a signal. Kalen focused on the data stream Thorn was isolating. It was a pattern, faint and almost lost in the background radiation of the cosmos, but it was undeniably artificial. It was ancient, unimaginably so, and it originated from a point far outside the galactic disk, in the cold, empty void between galaxies. The Ethel detected this signal millennia ago, Thorn continued, his voice hushed with awe. It has a strange resonant property. It doesn't interact strongly with simple, orderly systems, but it resonates with complex, chaotic ones, like the neural pathways of a developing intelligence, or the quantum fluctuations in a star nursery where life is forming, or the unpredictable cultural expressions of a diverse society. The pieces began to lock into place in Kalen's crystalline mind. The dissonance, he chimed, the sound low and resonant. The Ethel believed this signal would awaken something terrible if the combined dissonance of the galaxy reached a certain threshold. Their solution was to eliminate complexity, to enforce order, to silence any song they deemed too chaotic. Exactly, Thorn nodded. They were like someone who hears a complex piece of music and, fearing the crescendo, tries to stop it by smashing all the instruments. They misinterpreted the signal as a threat, a trigger for some cosmic horror. But we don't think it's a trigger. We don't even think it's a warning. He manipulated the holographic display, filtering the signal through a series of human-designed decryption algorithms. The chaotic wave patterns began to resolve to form nested layers of staggering complexity. It wasn't a weapons charging sequence. It wasn't a countdown. It was language. It was mathematics. It was art. It was a message left by a civilization so advanced that its very thoughts could be mistaken for a law of physics. The Ethel were afraid of it because they couldn't understand it, Thorn said softly. Their entire philosophy was built on the rejection of the very thing needed to comprehend this message: diversity. A single monolithic mind, a single harmonious culture can't grasp this. It's too multifaceted. It requires a chorus of different voices, different perspectives, different biologies, different ways of thinking, all working together to decipher it. It's like a lock that requires 1,000 different keys to be turned all at once. Kalen looked at the swirling, impossibly complex pattern of the signal, and he finally understood the ultimate tragic irony of the Ethel's reign. In their desperate, fearful attempt to protect the galaxy from a perceived threat, they had been blinding and deafening it to its greatest opportunity. They were trying to save the symphony by silencing all the instruments, never realizing that the point was not to avoid the crescendo, but to learn how to play along. The message wasn't a threat to be avoided. It was an invitation to be answered. He thought of the Lumani, his lost friends. Their swirling, chaotic consciousness would have been one of the keys. He thought of the Glyptons with their biological art, another key. He thought of the Cathar's long, crystalline memory, another. And he thought of the humans, the masters of dissonance, the species that embraced chaos and found strength in their infinite, glorious contradictions. They were not just another key. They were the ones who had arrived and taught the rest of the galaxy that it was holding a key ring, not a set of chains. He stood with Eva Rostova on the observation deck of the Alliance's new central station, a magnificent structure built in the orbit of a trinary star system, a joint creation of human, Glypton, and Cathar engineering. It was a place of breathtaking, harmonious chaos. Before them, a vast star chart filled the view, the distant point of the intergalactic signal highlighted with a soft, pulsing light. The old fear of the Council was gone from the galaxy, but it had been replaced by something far more profound, a shared sense of wonder and a humbling awareness of their own smallness. The conflict with the Council had not been the final war. It had been the preface. It had been the painful, necessary struggle to unite the orchestra before the true music could begin. They were afraid of the dark, Rostova said quietly, her gaze fixed on that distant point of light. They spent eons trying to build a wall against it. They never considered that the best way to deal with the dark is to turn and face it and see what stars it might hold. Kalen felt a resonance of pure, clear hope vibrate through his entire being, a feeling he had thought lost forever with the Lumani. He knew now that his allies had not died in vain. Their memory, their song, would be one of the voices in the chorus that would answer the call from the void. Humanity had not come to conquer the galaxy. They had come to awaken it. They had broken one age of fearful silence, only to reveal a new, far grander silence waiting to be filled with their collective voice. The future was no longer a path to be carefully managed and pruned, but an infinite, unwritten page. And for the first time, the assembled species of the galaxy were ready to write it together.